later.
Neil Coyle.
Pleasure to follow the former Home Secretary. I make clear up front that I very much welcome this bill, which means so much to so many for the reasons outlined in Manchester in particular, for the reasons outlined by the Home Secretary, but also those affected by other attacks, terror attacks in our country, including my own community, who were attacked on the 3rd of June 2017 at London Bridge and Borough Market. And of course the measures in this bill are targeted at protecting people from further incidents, primarily large entertainment venues, which makes my constituency still very relevant. The Printworks is being replaced in Rotherhithe, a live music venue. Members here may be familiar with Ministry of Sound at Elephant and Castle, and of course many members will be aware of the Young Vic, which could all be brought into coverage. And of course there are so many thousands of other smaller hospitality venues that could be brought into scope for different levels of requirements under this legislation. As has already been pointed out, we are at substantial risk of further attack, and the people whose motives are to attack us and our way of life sadly choose areas where there are multiple innocent civilians, and there is likely to be an international impact from an attack, which makes constituencies and communities like mine more vulnerable, because we have one of London's busiest train stations, we have part of a World Heritage Site in Tower Bridge, we have millions of visitors at Tate Modern, the Globe Theatre. The Shard itself is a target, sadly, for those who seek to disrupt or destroy our way of life. This bill, I need this bill to be effective to ensure that my constituency can go about its business and way of life routinely with minimal fear. And my community did receive a visit from the former Prime Minister Theresa May after the attack in 2017, which was very welcome. But I'm afraid that the level of support from the former governments was not sufficient. The real strength in rebuilding the community and the footfall at Borough Market and in the local community came from the local community, and our community is still indebted to the former Dean of Southwark Cathedral, Andrew Nunn, now retired, who led and shaped some of the work with his team at Southwark Cathedral, but also the work of the Borough Market Trust, individual traders who operate as very small businesses right through to large restaurants and traders across London. But there were many other local businesses who played their part, including Barclays Bank on Borough High Street, who provided facilities for those locked out of their own premises, and at News UK, who don't often get praise from this political party, but were provided a generous voucher scheme for hundreds of its employees to ensure that the market was receiving more business sooner, for which traders were incredibly grateful. And look, it sounds, I'm almost apologetic in raising this because it sounds really, really niche, but one issue that concerns me is the security barriers, is the bollards, because 7 years on, there have been lots of issues in trying to ensure sufficient external protection to venues. And this comes back to the nature of the attacks we see. Manchester was very different to London Bridge and Borough Market. Many more of the more recent terror attacks we see involve vehicles and involve knives and blades. The vehicle protections are an issue for lots of the venues who will be covered by this, but they will not be able to act alone in installing protective measures. And parts 11 and 12 of the bill require risk assessments, but do not confer sufficient responsibility on all agencies involved in preparedness to prevent an attack that is required currently, is my reading, and I hope that ministers will address that as the bill goes forward. The dispute resolution system in parts 18 to 20 cover use of a premises and venue. They do not cover shared spaces or communal areas. For example, and the very practical experience in Southwark is of the entrance and exits from Transport for London roads, a Southwark Council road, and communal shared space, partly owned by the Borough Market Trust itself. Where there are a mixture of owners and responsibilities, there needs to be a clearer means of delivering the change that's required to make the legislation effective. And I think that needs pumping up. And I just asked the question whether the government needs to work with MHCLG on improving the planning process so that where measures are identified that are about, perhaps in a risk assessment as part of 11 or 12 of this bill, there could be a fast-track process for getting those measures implemented through planning. There are other plans from this government to improve the planning system. That would be a very sensible measure to take forward, I think. Then there is the issue of overview and review of preparedness, and I was really grateful to Pool Reinsurance, who were very helpful after the attack in talking through the changes that the government did make to terror insurance that I supported at the time. But one of the issues they raised a lot was whether there was sufficient coverage, and it seems a reasonable additional part of the legislation to require those with duties under Part 11 and 12 to have terror insurance, because that insurance could be integral to protections and preparedness. And there could be a means of drawing down, written into the bill, there could be a means of drawing down on insurance systems. Now, I don't think when it comes to security measures that the largesse or generosity or imagination of an individual firm should determine whether they will allow venues to draw down on their insurance. I think there needs to be a minimum requirement. And when, I give a practical example, when a Henry Moore piece was, lots were being stolen across London and elsewhere and melted down, and when Southwark Council said we better get rid of ours, actually we worked with the insurer to build some protective measures, including the plinth has an alarm, there are deep planters with concrete bases, there's CCTV, all paid for by the insurer rather than targeted to the residents who have this amazing piece in their backyard. But again, it shouldn't be about the imagination of an individual insurer. It should come down to, perhaps the training costs could be, or training could be provided by Pool Reinsurance or another actor, or covered by Pool Reinsurance. And of course, Pool Reinsurance could provide an annual review of preparedness. How many venues now have protection? This is something that perhaps could be reported back to Parliament or in the public domain at no cost to homeowners, because Pool Ray actually provides something along similar lines elsewhere. And I hope ministers will be examining that. The former Home Secretary also mentioned local authorities and licensing. I agree that the last government loaded additional responsibilities with no new resources onto many councils, including my own, with no recourse to public funds being very much a significant one. This is another area I have a concern. I think the government's intent is clear, but I would ask that there is full cost recovery available for local authorities who are having to assess. There are authorities like my own that will have more responsibility to deliver this, and the cost should not be borne by local taxpayers to provide protective measures to defend everyone who visits those venues. It should be a matter of full cost recovery, and I hope that will be clearer in I think it's part 38 of the bill. That said, again, support this legislation. I hope the issues I've briefly referenced will be addressed as legislation processes. And we all come here to make a difference. This legislation will not just make a difference, it will save lives, and it will weaken the chances of those who seek to attack us and undermine our way of life. And it should be, and I'm glad it's been welcomed by everyone across the House today.
We come to a maiden speech. You must bob if you wish to contribute. Rachel Gilmore.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, for calling me to make my maiden speech. Before I do, could I commend Fagan Murray and her family and friends for the excellent campaign they have continued, complete